One introduction RAWSEP view: the United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only. For home building and furniture building, for just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM 2.5 emissions, yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable, wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree, but it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM 2.5, and PM 2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM 2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut-down and burned tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM 2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lungs, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM 2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom, the Eco-Design Wood Stove, and International Convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. RAWSEP view: purple air PM 2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM 2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM 2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary.
Hi, my name is Lily. Andrew gave you the intro to Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates and their concern for air pollution from indoor residential wood burning. Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates, or RAWSEP, would like every near neighbor of an indoor residential wood burner whose wood smoke enters their yards and sickens the near neighbors to have a purple air PM 2.5 monitor hanging from the eaves of their home to measure the level of PM 2.5 entering their yards. That measurement of air pollution should be used as evidence of unnecessary air pollution, and each indoor residential wood burner should be shut down based on that evidence, one indoor residential wood burner at a time if necessary. The presentation by Andrew ended at 2 minutes 5 seconds. The same presentation by Emma starts at 2 minutes 3 seconds before the end of this podcast. So I am Lily, your timekeeper, and you can start the next podcast at 2 minutes 5 seconds in if you would not like to see the presentation by Andrew a second time. This presentation by me, Lily, ends at 5 minutes in. What you will see in the main content of this RAWSEP podcast will be news about air pollution from indoor residential wood burning and how that air pollution is being combated by ordinary people just like you who are unfortunately near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners at this time. There will also be news about unnecessary and highly polluting use of wood as fuel in industrial wood burners and preventable air pollution from wood burning wildfires. There will also be news about air pollution from PM 2.5 from gas-powered cars. There will also be news about airborne diseases which are also preventable with vaccines such as COVID-19 and measles and whooping cough, to name just a few. In 2025, Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates is also concerned with combating the Trump destruction of government funding for programs which protect human health through the Department of Health and Human Services, and Trump destruction of programs which fund the science and medical research plan to protect human health from preventable illnesses. Protecting human health is a patriotic act, and our defense against enemies is weakened if we are not as healthy as we can be. Heat pump rebates are now offered by the federal government, distributed through the eligible United States, are available in 2025, and are the best, cleanest, and now cheapest alternative to indoor residential wood burning if that burning is actually done to purportedly save money. Wind and solar as sources of the electricity that powers heat pumps and electric cars is also cheaper than burning wood. The adverse health effects that are caused by indoor residential wood burning also come at a cost to near neighbors, both in shortening and ending their lives, and in actual hospital, clinic, and funeral costs. Instead of being compensated monetarily, near neighbors should instead be able to achieve immediate relief by stopping indoor residential wood burning in their hyper-localized neighborhoods, which relief readings from purple air PM 2.5 monitors used as evidence of air pollution will help them achieve. Welcome to news about hopeful scientific and medical achievements that will also help us achieve the goal of clean air to breathe.
Episode 5070 HWD June 5, 2025. A complete list of everything in their Republican bill and how much it would cost or save. In Episode 5070 HWD, a complete list of everything in the Republican bill and how much it would cost or save. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, June 4, 2025. 10-year cost tax cut extensions. Temporary tax cuts. Defense Homeland Security Immigration. $1 trillion, $2 trillion, $3 trillion, $4 trillion, $5 trillion. 10-year savings. Energy finance. Federal employees. Natural resources. Other transportation infrastructure. Other health care. Food benefits. Student loans. Climate. Other taxes. Medicaid. $1 trillion. 10-year costs. Tax cut extensions. Temporary tax cuts. Defense Homeland Security Immigration. $1 trillion, $2 trillion, $3 trillion, $4 trillion, $5 trillion. 10-year savings. Energy finance. Federal employees. Natural resources. Other transportation infrastructure. Other healthcare. Food benefits. Student loans. Climate. Other taxes. Medicaid. $1 trillion. The tax and spending bill recently passed by House Republicans includes hundreds of provisions including extending and expanding large tax cuts, partly offset by big cuts to Medicaid, food benefits and other programs that would add nearly $3 trillion to the national debt including interest costs. The measure is now in the hands of the Senate where it could undergo significant changes. Below is a table that lists how nearly every provision would affect the federal budget over 10 years as estimated by the Congressional Budget Office in an update released Wednesday. The CBO evaluation does not include a handful of policy provisions that do not have direct effects on the deficit, like one that would limit the power of federal judges to hold people in contempt and another that would establish a 10-year moratorium on the enforcement of state laws regulating AI tax cut extensions, cost or savings marginal tax rates. Permanently extend lower rates. $2,177 billion standard deduction. Provide a temporary enhancement through 2028 with current levels permanent after an inflation adjustment. $1,308 billion alternative minimum tax. Permanently extend the increased individual alternative minimum tax exemption and phase out thresholds. $1,304 billion business income deduction. Increase the deduction to 23% from 20% and make it permanent. $820 billion child tax credit. Provide an additional $500 per child through 2028 with current levels permanent after and adjust for inflation. $797 billion estate and gift tax exemptions. Increase and permanently extend the estate and lifetime gift tax exemption. $212 billion foreign derived intangible income and global intangible low taxed income deductions. Permanently increase deduction amounts. $134 billion base erosion. Anti-abuse tax. Permanently reduce the rate and retain the current treatment of tax credits. $31 billion paid family and medical leave credit. Permanently extend and modify the credit for businesses. $5.5 billion income resulting from discharge of student debt on account of death or total disability. Permanently extend an exclusion from a taxpayer's income and add a social security number requirement. $0.4 billion hazardous duty area. Permanently list the Sinai Peninsula as a hazardous duty area for tax purposes. Deduction for personal exemptions. Permanently repeal the exemptions were replaced by a larger standard deduction in the 2017 tax bill. Minus $1,870 billion tax cuts lasting only through Trump's term. Cost or savings. No tax on overtime. Allow workers who are not considered highly compensated to deduct overtime pay from taxable income. A work eligible social security number would be required for tax years 2025, 2028. $124 billion enhanced deduction for seniors. Provide an additional deduction of $4,000 with income limits of $75,000 for single filers and $150,000 for married filers for tax years 2025, 2028. $66 billion no tax on car interest. Provide deduction of up to $10,000 for loan interest on vehicles that undergo final assembly in the U.S. for tax years 2025, $2028.58 million. No tax on tips allow workers who are not considered highly compensated to deduct tips from taxable income. A work-eligible Social Security number would be required for tax years 2025. $2028.40 billion. Charitable contribution deduction. Reinstate partial deduction $150 for single filers, $300 for married filers for those who do not itemize for tax years 2025. $2028.6.9 billion. Other tax provisions. Cost or savings depreciation allowance for qualified production property allow immediate deductibility of 100% of the cost of certain new factories and improvements. $148 million. Business interest deduction change calculation of adjusted taxable income. $40 billion. Depreciation allowance for certain property allow immediate expensing of 100% of the cost of qualified property acquired from 2025 to 2030. $37 billion. Expensing of certain depreciable business assets. Increased dollar limitations. $25 billion. Deduction of domestic research and experimental expenditures allow immediate deductibility for expenditures paid or incurred from 2025 to 2030. $23 billion. Charitable contributions to organizations with scholarships provide new tax credit for gifts to organizations that provide scholarships for calendar years 2026. $2029.20 billion. Trump accounts create new savings accounts for children with a government contribution of $1,000 per child born from 2024 to 2028. $17 billion. Small manufacturing businesses change accounting rules. $15 billion. Low-income housing credit modifies credit allocations and bond financing thresholds and gives a basis boost to Indian and rural areas. $13 billion. Reporting thresholds for payments increase thresholds for reporting payments to independent contractors and other payees. $13 billion. Employer payments of student loans make the exclusion from gross income permanent and index for inflation. $11 billion. Opportunity zones renew and make changes to the existing program. $5.5 billion. Restoration of taxable rights subsidiary asset test. $3.3 billion. Adoption tax credit make credit partially refundable and change rules for tribal governments. $2.3 billion. Interactions between provisions. $1.8 billion. Firearm silencers eliminate taxes and some regulations. $1.5 billion. Loans secured by rural or agricultural real estate partially exclude interest on certain loans. $1.1 billion. Certain income earned in the U.S. Virgin Islands exempt income for the purposes of a GILTI deduction. $0.9 billion. Employer provided child care credit permanently increase at a new separate amount for small businesses index for inflation. $0.7 billion. Sound recording productions increase ability to expense certain costs of producing sound recordings. $0.2 billion. 529 savings plans expend allowed expenses. $0.1 billion. Disaster related personal casualty losses extend rules. $0.1 billion. IRS direct file program replaced program with a public-private partnership to offer free tax filing. Certain purchases of employee-owned stock disregard for purposes of foundation tax on excess business holdings. Exclusion of research income from unrelated business taxable income. Limit to publicly available research. Increase penalties for unauthorized disclosures of taxpayer information. Restrict regulation of contingency fees. Wagering losses permanently extend limit qualified bicycle commuting reimbursement. Permanently eliminate the exclusion. $0.2 billion. American Opportunity and Lifetime Learning Credits require that students or taxpayers filing on behalf of students include their Social Security numbers on tax returns. $0.9 billion. Exception to denial of deduction for business meals. $0.9 billion. Sports franchises limit amortization deductions for certain sports-related intangibles. $1.0 billion. Increased penalties connected to COVID-related employee retention credits. $1.6 billion. Unrelated business taxable income of a tax-exempt organization increased by amount of certain fringe benefit expenses for which deduction is disallowed. $2.7 billion. Tax on excess compensation within tax-exempt organizations expand application of tax. $3.8 billion. Mortgage casualty loss and other Itemized deductions permanently lower the home mortgage interest deduction to the first $750,000 and limit the casualty loss deduction to losses resulting from federally declared disasters and terminate miscellaneous itemized deductions -$6.2 billion. Investment income of certain private colleges and universities increase excise tax for wealthier institutions -$6.7 billion. Excise tax for tobacco products limit drawback of taxes paid with respect to substituted merchandise -$12 billion. Treatment of payments from partnerships to partners for property or services -$12 billion. Moving expenses exclusion and deduction permanently eliminate both except for active duty military -$14 billion. Earned income tax credit make changes to prevent duplicate claims and create a program integrity task force -$15 billion. Compensation paid to certain high earning employees change deduction limitation rules -$16 billion. Investment income of tax exempt private foundations increase excise tax rates -$16 billion. Charitable contributions made by corporations establish a floor of 1% of taxable income on deduction -$17 billion. Excise tax on money sent abroad impose new excise tax on remittance transfers by those who are not U.S. citizens or U.S. nationals -$26 billion. Limitation on excess business losses by non-corporate taxpayers make permanent -$27 billion. De minimis entry privilege repeal the privilege which currently allows shipments under $800 to enter the U.S. duty-free -$39 billion. New limitation on itemized deductions permanently change -$41 billion. Raise certain taxes to retaliate against unfair foreign taxes -$116 billion. State and local tax deduction permanently cap itemized deductions for state and local taxes at $40,000 per household. The current cap is set to expire next year, so any cap imposed would save the government money -$787 billion. Medicaid costs or savings defund Planned Parenthood. Prevent Planned Parenthood or theoretical similar organizations from receiving Medicaid payments. $0.3 billion. Out-of-state providers make it easier for children in Medicaid to see out-of-state specialists. $0.2 billion. Medicaid death checks require states to check a Social Security death file more often to cancel coverage for dead people. Medicaid provider checks require states to check monthly whether doctors or other providers have been kicked out of other state Medicaid programs. More Medicaid provider checks require states to check whether doctors or other providers have died. Demonstration projects require that Medicaid payment experiments be budget neutral. Lower home equity limit. Eliminate Medicaid coverage for long-term care for people whose home is worth more than $1 million -$0.2 billion. Spread pricing ban. A practice sometimes used by pharmacy benefit managers in pricing drugs for Medicaid -$0.2 billion. Screen out immigrants. Prevent states from enrolling people in Medicaid until their citizenship status can be confirmed $0.8 billion. Pharmacy rules require pharmacies that accept Medicaid to participate in an annual cost survey -$2.5 billion. Gender transition care ban. The use of Medicaid funds for gender-affirming medical care for transgender minors and adults -$2.6 billion. Limit retroactive coverage. Reduce how long Medicaid will pay beneficiary medical bills from before they sign up from 3 months to 1 month -$6.3 billion. Cut good faith payments. Reduce payments to states with errors and other improper Medicaid payments -$7.4 billion. New co-payments allow states to charge some Medicaid patients co-payments of up to $35 for medical services -$8.2 billion. Reduce federal funding for certain states. Require states that use their own funds to provide health insurance outside of Medicaid to undocumented immigrants to pay a higher share for Medicaid expansion beneficiaries -$11 billion. And new expansion funding. Eliminate extra Medicaid financing for states that newly expand Medicaid -$13 billion. Medicaid address checks use data to confirm addresses and disenroll people signed up in 2 states -$17 billion. Nursing home staffing. Cancel a regulation that required minimum staffing ratios for nursing homes -$23 billion. Medicaid managed care taxes. Prevent states from using taxes on managed care plans to increase federal funding -$34 billion. More eligibility checks require states to check eligibility of people in the Medicaid expansion every 6 months instead of once a year -$60 billion limit. State-directed payments prevent most states from using special funding to pay Medicaid providers higher prices than Medicare would pay. -$72 billion. Postponement of a rule simplifying eligibility and enrollment processes allow states to require more paperwork and more frequent eligibility checks for people in Medicaid. -$77 billion. Medicare premiums cancel a rule making it easier for low-income Medicare beneficiaries to sign up for help paying premiums. -$85 billion. Provider tax freeze prevent states from increasing their current tax rates on Medicaid providers, which are often used to boost federal payments. -$87 billion. Work requirements require childless adults to work, volunteer, or attend school for 80 hours a month as a condition of enrollment unless they qualify for an exception. -$336 billion. Other healthcare cost or savings interactions between provisions. $116 billion. Health savings accounts expand eligibility for tax-free health savings account and increase the size of allowable contributions. $26 billion. Health savings account uses allow tax-free health savings account money to be used for gym memberships, on-site employee clinics, and other new categories of medical services. $16 billion. Increase some Medicare doctor payments. Change a formula that determines doctors pay from Medicare. $8.9 billion. Orphan drugs exempt certain drugs from the Medicare drug negotiation program. $4.9 billion. Rural hospitals expand the definition of rural emergency hospital under Medicare. $0.8 billion. Delay disproportionate share hospital cuts. Delay scheduled payment cuts to hospitals that treat more patients without health insurance. $0.6 billion. Choice arrangements allow employers to give workers tax-free money to buy their own insurance and create a 2-year tax credit for small businesses. $0.5 billion. Achieving a better life experience. Able accounts change rules for the savings account for people with disabilities. Improper Medicare payments funds artificial intelligence contractors to examine Medicare improper payments and recoup overpayments. Pharmacy benefit managers impose transparency requirements and other rules on private companies that administer Medicare drug plans. -$0.4 billion. Increase penalties connected to COVID-related employee retention credits. -$4.7 billion. Medicare coverage limit eligibility to green card holders and certain other immigrants. Current law includes all who are lawfully present. -$5.4 billion. Obamacare cost-sharing reductions fund payments to insurance companies to lower Obamacare deductibles and co-payments for low-income purchasers and restrict coverage of abortions in those plans. -$34 billion. Premium tax credits during Medicaid waiting period. Eliminates certain exception for those in a Medicaid waiting period due to immigration status that allows them to receive premium tax credits. -$50 billion. Premium tax credits for immigrants limit eligibility to green card holders and certain other immigrants. Current law includes all who are lawfully present. -$79 billion. Premium tax credits require annual verification of income and other changes. -$102 billion. Tighten Obamacare plan rules. Require more income checks and change benefit rules for private Obamacare health coverage. -$105 billion. Food benefits cost or savings interactions between provisions. $24 billion. Emergency food assistance. SNAP payment errors require all small payment errors to count toward the state's payment error rate. -$0.1 billion. SNAP eligibility limit benefits to citizens or lawful permanent residents. -$3.9 billion. Repeal the National Education and Obesity Prevention Grant Program. -$5.5 billion. SNAP utility allowances limit how energy assistance is used to set SNAP allotments. -$5.9 billion. National Accuracy Clearinghouse change how states use the system that identifies people who collect benefits in multiple states. -$7.4 billion. Internet expense restrictions forbid use of internet costs in setting SNAP allotments. -$11 billion. SNAP state cost sharing increase the share states pay to administer the program. -$27 billion. Thrifty food plan limit increases to the plan used to set food benefit levels. -$37 billion. SNAP work requirements. A wider range of aid recipients would be required to obtain work. -$92 billion. SNAP state matching funds require states to pay a share of benefits currently funded in full by the federal government. -$128 billion. Climate cost or savings. Clean fuel production credit extend credit for biofuels an additional 4 years through 2031 and may changes. $45 billion. Publicly traded partnerships. Treated as corporations expand activities that can be categorized as qualifying income to include storing and transporting hydrogen and capturing carbon dioxide from smokes. Tax $1.9 billion. Methane emissions and waste reduction postponed for 10 years the implementation of a fee on methane leaks from oil and gas operations and repeal funding for other programs to reduce leaks. $1.4 billion Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund repeal and rescind Inflation Reduction Act funds grants to reduce air pollution at ports. Repeal and rescind Inflation Reduction Act funds greenhouse gas emissions data collection and biofuels impact testing. Repeal and rescind Inflation Reduction Act funds American Innovation and Manufacturing Act to address hydrofluorocarbons. Repeal and rescind Inflation Reduction Act funds greenhouse gas corporate reporting. Repeal and rescind Inflation Reduction Act funds environmental compliance technology. Repeal and rescind Inflation Reduction Act funds hiring and training of new EPS staff. Repeal and rescind Inflation Reduction Act funds credit for certain energy property phase out low emissions electricity program. Repeal and rescind Inflation Reduction Act funds diesel emissions reductions. Repeal and rescind Inflation Reduction Act funds $0.1 billion climate change action plans for state, local and tribal governments. Repeal and rescind Inflation Reduction Act funds $0.1 billion low embodied carbon labeling for construction materials. Repeal and rescind Inflation Reduction Act funds $0.1 billion air pollution including at schools. Repeal and rescind Inflation Reduction Act funds $0.1 billion declarations advertising the environmental impact of products. Repeal and rescind Inflation Reduction Act funds $0.2 billion environmental and climate justice block grants. Repeal and rescind Inflation Reduction Act funds $0.3 billion clean heavy duty vehicles. Repeal part of the Clean Air Act and rescind funds that help states and localities adopt zero emission vehicles. $0.4 billion alternative fuel vehicle refueling property credit terminate at the end of 2025. $1.2 billion zero emission nuclear power production credit phase down credit for existing nuclear plants. $3.8 billion new energy efficient home credit terminate at the end of 2025. $6.0 billion previously owned clean vehicle credit terminate at the end of 2025. $7.4 billion clean hydrogen production credit terminate at the end of 2025. $9.2 billion carbon oxide sequestration credit restrict. $18 billion energy efficient home improvement credit terminate at the end of 2025. $21 billion advanced manufacturing production credit phase out in 2031. 1 year earlier than current law and disqualify facilities that use certain components from China and other foreign entities of concern. $44 billion residential clean energy credit terminate the tax credit for rooftop solar geothermal heat pumps and other home devices at the end of 2025. $77 billion clean vehicle credit terminate the $7,500 consumer rebate for electric vehicles at the end of 2025 with an exception for automakers that have sold fewer than 200,000 battery powered models. $79 billion qualified commercial clean vehicles credit terminate the credit for companies that buy electric cars or trucks including businesses who lease the vehicles to consumers at the end of 2025. $105 billion repeal EPA and National Highway Traffic Safety Administration emissions rules. $105 billion clean electricity production and investment credits phase down tax credits for low emissions electricity sources like wind, solar, nuclear and geothermal power. Any restrictions on transferability and the use of components from China. $201 billion student loans costs or savings interactions between provisions. $41 billion Pell Grants bar grants for students taking fewer than 15 credit hours a year while allowing grants for short-term professional training certificates. $2.8 billion student loan eligibility prevents certain non-U.S. nationals from receiving student aid. Cap the total amount of aid annually. $0.5 billion higher education accountability require contributions to a grant program to participate in student loan programs. Institute new rules to receive certain grants. $6.2 billion regulation repeals eliminate the 90/10 and gainful employment rules for for-profit colleges as well as rules affecting loan discharges. $9.0 billion Department of Education authority limit authority to issue regulations that would increase the cost of federal student loans. $32 billion student loan limits eliminate subsidized loans and grad plus loans cap parent plus loans and amend Undergraduate loan limits -51 billion. Student loan repayment limit. Income-driven repayment options -295 million. Defense cost or savings fund. Shipbuilding $32 billion fund. Air and missile defense $24 billion fund. Munitions and the defense industrial base $19 billion fund. Low-cost weapons $13 billion fund. Nuclear forces $13 billion fund. Military readiness $11 billion fund. U.S. Indo-Pacific Command $11 billion. Armed Forces Quality of Life Fund. Housing improvements, bonuses, tuition and child care assistance $8.1 billion fund. Air superiority programs $6.8 billion fund. Border security $4.9 billion fund. Intelligence programs $1.9 billion fund. Audits and cybersecurity $0.4 billion fund. Inspector General Homeland Security and Immigration cost or savings. Immigration enforcement. Direct revenue from expanded immigration fees would fund enforcement work across several agencies $73 billion. Border security fund. Border barrier system construction and related activities $50 billion. U.S. Customs and Border Protection Fund to expand workforce and purchase new vehicles and technology $15 billion. State Border Security Funding Fund. Reimbursements to states for border security actions $12 billion. State Homeland Security grants for the 2028 Olympics, 2026 FIFA World Cup and other security $2.6 billion. Presidential Residence Protection Fund. Reimbursements to local law enforcement for protecting the president's private residences $0.3 billion. Higher immigration fees. Set higher fees for certain travel, work authorization and asylum applications, raising revenue to fund enforcement -$64 billion. Federal employees cost or savings. Worker complaints require workers and former workers to pay filing fees when they make complaints. Dependent health benefit eligibility require more frequent checks of whether workers' dependents receiving federal health benefits are eligible -$1.5 billion. New federal employees would either give up some civil service protections or be asked to pay more for their retirement accounts -$4.1 billion. Annuity supplement. Reduce additional payments for employees who retire early -$6.9 billion. Transportation and infrastructure cost or savings. Coast Guard funding for vessels, infrastructure, aircraft and other activities $20 billion. Air traffic control funding for facilities, equipment, training and stuffing $12 billion. John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts funding $0.3 billion. New motor carrier compliance website. Annual fee of $100 for access duties on vessels entering the U.S. Increased tonnage duty rates by 125% -$0.3 billion. Rescission of funds. Eliminate funding for sustainable aviation fuel, neighborhood access and equity. Green federal buildings. Environmental reviews and low carbon transportation material grants -$4.0 billion. New electric and hybrid vehicle fees. Require states to collect new registration fees of $250 for electric and $100 for hybrid vehicles to place in the Federal Highway Fund. -$64 billion. Natural resources cost or savings. Surface water storage and water conveyance facilities fund. Construction to increase capacity of surface water storage and conveyance facilities $2.5 billion. Outer continental shelf revenue. Increase energy receipts available to states and conservation programs $1.2 billion. America's 250th anniversary fund. Commemoration and establish the National Garden of American Heroes $0.2 billion. Protest fees. Establish filing fees to submit protests against oil and gas lease sales. Geothermal lease sales. Require the Secretary to hold geothermal lease sales yearly. Council on Environmental Quality. Rescind Inflation Reduction Act funding for environmental and climate data collection. Coal reserve mining. Authorizes mining of federal reserves in Montana. Mineral mining in Minnesota. Reinstate leases cancelled under Biden in the Superior National Forest -$0.1 billion. Coastal communities and climate resilience. Rescinds Inflation Reduction Act funds -$0.1 billion. Renewable energy fees. Codify fees for wind and solar energy projects on federal lands -$0.2 billion. Coal leasing. Rescind moratorium on new coal leasing and mandate new lease sales -$0.2 billion. Timber harvesting. Require the Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management to enter into long-term contracts -$0.2 billion. Rescission of funds for the National Park Service, Bureau of of Land Management, Forest Service and other agencies -$0.3 billion. Oil and gas leasing in Alaska reissue Arctic National Wildlife Refuge leases revoked under Biden and mandate new lease sales -$0.9 billion. Environmental reviews allow sponsors to expedite reviews for a fee -$1.0 billion. Mandatory offshore oil and gas lease sales -$6.3 billion. Onshore oil and gas lease sales reinstate quarterly lease sales, require Secretary to offer land for leasing -$13 billion. Finance cost or savings. Consumer Financial Civil Penalty Fund limit how the CFPB uses funds collected for violations of consumer financial law. Green and Resilient Retrofit Program rescind unobligated money in this HUD program. Retrofitting housing -$0.1 billion. Office of Financial Research cap the assessments big financial institutions pay to fund the office's work -$0.3 billion. Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection reduce the amount the Bureau may receive from the Federal Reserve to cover operating expenses -$3.9 billion. Public Company Accounting Board transfer the board's authorities to the Securities and Exchange Commission and eliminate authority to collect accounting support fees -$5.6 billion. Energy cost or savings. Strategic Petroleum Reserve Fund cavern repairs and petroleum product acquisition $2.0 billion. De-risking compensation program set up a program compensating sponsors of coal, oil, mineral gas and nuclear projects should future federal action harm them. $0.2 billion. Alaska Natural Gas Pipeline Department of Energy loan guarantee expenses. Natural gas export user fees set a $1 million fee for a guaranteed license to export natural gas from the U.S. to any country without a free trade agreement -$0.1 billion. Natural gas permitting enables applicants for natural gas projects to pay for expedited permitting -$0.7 billion. Inflation Reduction Act decisions rescind unobligated funds in energy programs created by the Inflation Reduction Act -$5.3 billion. Other cost or savings. Agricultural assistance funding $52 billion. Agricultural trade promotion research and other funding $6.1 billion. Funding for commercial artificial intelligence and federal IT systems $0.5 billion. Regulatory reform. Rural conservation programs transfer funds from the Commodity Credit Corporation and rescind conservation funding from the Inflation Reduction Act -$1.8 billion. Electromagnetic spectrum auction require the government to identify and auction spectrum by 2034 -$88 billion. No provisions with costs or savings listed as have a minimal effect on the budget in cases where the CBO estimated revenue and spending changes for the same provision. Those amounts were combined to come up with one cost or savings number. Sources: Congressional Budget Office cost and savings estimates. Plan details. House Committees plan details.
Cat's corner strategy with Tiger and Leone. Saying the quiet part out loud. Roar. Hi, I am Tiger. Our human asked us to get up from our naps and start Cat's corner strategy with Tiger and Leone. She gave us a list of internet allies which we will post for her here.
Hi, I am Leone. It is better for your mental fitness to go to these websites than to go to bro sites for advice. Substack letters from an American. Heather Cox Richardson. Substack your local epidemiologist. The Midas Touch. The Guardian. The New York Times.
One introduction. RAWSEP view. The United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only. For home building and furniture building, for just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses. It is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM 2.5 emissions, yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable, wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree. But it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen, and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM 2.5, and PM 2.5 is Not absorbed by trees, so PM2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut down and burn tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lungs, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom, the Eco-Design Wood Stove. An international convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. RAWSEP view purple air PM2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary.